Namaste. All of you are welcomed in this session of the new education policy which government has just now passed. We would be having a discussion, and our eminent panelists are Dr. Vikas, Dr. Sandeep Pandey, Dr. Ramachandran, and Simantini Dhuru. The idea about this whole thing is that we must start the discussion because it is a long discussion. May not be what 60 minutes is too little a time to check on this. I will request Mr. Vikas to please moderate the session and just to make you some understanding what we are talking. We are talking of a education policy where there are too many layers, too many verticals which is to be discussed. Now, if we start talking in terms of that, there is a language issue because we are talking of 3 language, 2 language, foreign language. There's a regulator issue, UGC, AICT, NCT. The present policy says all will go, there will be only one regulator, means more power in one person. Then we are talking of the merit. Now they say there will not be an exam-oriented merit, it will be learning-oriented merit. How you will gauge, how you will do, it is a different thing. Then we are talking of 100 best institutions of the foreign to come into India. Now, foreign institutions work like a business group. Now, there are many layers. So, what we propose is that today, Vignesh will lead the discussion. Guru is there. And in subsequent weeks to come, each vertical we will be discussing in detail. So that some meaningful thing, what on the language issue, what on the regulator issue, what on the Parak issue, things can be done. I hand it over to Vignesh. Now this is your platform and you please go ahead. Vignesh, please.
Thank you so much, Anandji. I think you rightly pointed out this is a vast subject and there's so many things to unpack. Luckily for us, we have a very eminent panel to help us unpack this. Like Anandji mentioned, today we'll be kind of taking a macro level discussion and talking a little bit more of zooming out and getting more context and a little macro level understanding. Again, like he said, going forward, we will specialize and focus on specific areas as well going forward. So without really taking too much time, I'd like to introduce the speakers. First off, we have Simantini Dhuru. Simantini has been involved in various human rights and environmental movements since 1986. She's the director of Avehi Abacus project, initiative in the field of education, reaching out to almost 900 municipal schools. So she's contributed to many policies and processes at the national and state level. Thank you so much for being here, Simantini. We're really glad to have you. Second, we have Dr. Vikas Gupta. Dr. Vikas Gupta teaches at TU, and his area of interest are in the history of education in modern India, as well as contemporary education. He is also the organizing secretary of All India Forum for Right Education. He's on the board of trustees of Kishore Bharati, and he's a joint secretary of Sambhavana. So thank you so much, Dr. Vikas Gupta. We're really happy to have you here. Next up, we have Dr. Sandeep Pandey. Dr. Pandey is an IIT alumnus who holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from UC Berkeley. He co-founded Asha for Education and has been working on right to education for a long time. During the past 5 years, he's taught courses on social movements and development studies at IIT Gandhinagar, BHU Varanasi, IIM Ahmedabad, as well as Nalsar. Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey, for joining us. Really happy to have you as well.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Vijaya Ramachandran, daughter of former President R. Venkatraman. She's been helping children of brick kiln workers to complete their school education and also helping them get into higher education as well. She runs 30 plus centers in Kanpur and neighboring areas. Thank you so much again, Vijaya Ramachandran, for being here. Really happy to have you and excited to hear your thoughts. So without really taking too much time, we do have only 60 minutes. I'd like to dive right into the topic itself. And I'd like to start by with a question to Simantini. So with any policy, it's important to not just see it as a single document and just what is happening today, but in the backdrop of the society that it's implemented in, as well as the historical context with which we are here today. So really, it would be great if you could start off by unpacking some of this, Simantini.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it's really a great concern to us that on this is today, 15th of August, our country achieved independence from colonial rule. But the policy that we are here to discuss today, some of the features are in fact, driving us towards the same path that we freed ourselves from more than 7 decades back. And we, in fact, need to go back to more or less the same period when we achieved independence, and roughly the Second World War, towards the end of Second World War. So I really need to, will be happy to set the global context in which we need to see what is happening through the national education policy of 2020. And it is just one of the cornerstones of the exercise that is unleashed towards the end of Second World War. So we know that towards the end of the Second World War, there was, it was a period which saw great incubation of information technology. And the efforts of peace and reconciliation that was there in the First World War, the League of Nations was disbanded. And it was after the war ended, there was establishment of the UN agencies to see development, peace, and sustainability in new light. So while these bilateral agencies and agencies that sought to reframe people's rights and rights to their resources and right to peace and right to livelihood in a new way, the earlier mechanism of colonialism had not really given up. And at the time of the framing of the UN and around the time of our independence, we also saw the emergence of the GATT mechanism. It was a kind of a regrouping of the colonial powers that had a new avatar of industrialized companies, industrialized conglomerates, MNCs, as we understand them. And so at that period and for a long time, what drove these forces was essentially oil in various parts of the world. In order to achieve the, the targets of amassing more and more wealth of different kind, more and more natural resources, IT has been one of the strongest kind of an arm that they have had. And in that sense, the work that happened during the Cold War needs to be got into. So in terms of this policy and several earlier policy documents, we always hear this term knowledge economy. This term is something that is taken as a benign kind of a concept, as if, understanding and knowledge and learning and education is going to be the cornerstone of the economy. Here, we need to see that around the height of Cold War in 1959, an Austrian economist, Peter Drucker, he invented a term called knowledge worker. And later, soon in 1962, there emerges a concept of knowledge economy. So anything in terms of information, whatever kind of information, the collection of information, organization, its interpretation, and its application, its use, data, that is what is accounted as knowledge, which should be seen as property to be used for profit. And basically, it should be seen as a productive asset, a capital. And this is what lies at the basis of where this national education policy and several other policy documents that emerged before that are the kind of, the philosophy under which they nestle. And it comes from the philosophy of management, or what is termed in a benign way as scientific management, where, workers and people with different kind of skill sets and different kinds of control, having resources, need to be regulated in a certain way so that profit is maximized, so that profit is controlled. And IT has gradually, since last 3 decades, even much more, but IT has made its presence felt. And we all know it's a cliche now to say that data is new oil. So what this national education policy is the very first introductory remarks in the policy are very, very clearly stating the intention that is expressed in this philosophy that lies behind this idea of knowledge economy, which is the basic idea that we need to go into questioning. And it's very clearly the NEP says that the objective of the policy is to create skilled workforce, particularly with skills in mathematics, computer science, data science. It doesn't mince word. In terms of the construction of the concept of knowledge economy, it's never really goes in deeper in that. And if you read the document closely, carefully, you understand that it comes at the point where it matters the most, where very few people in society are there in the position of knowledge creators, and that is the higher education. So when you come to the higher education section, then you see the use of the term knowledge economy. If you saw the 2016 draft, that draft was littered with this kind of a concept, and it was extremely obvious to break the intention, to expose the intention behind it. This particular document is extremely cleverly, but extremely very, very poorly worded. At the same time, it is able to kind of couch a lot of shocks that are there in offer, and push them, make them sound acceptable. And so this is primarily the kind of an idea where society's understanding is very, very clear. I mean, the policy's understanding is very, very clear that in a country where nearly 54% of our people are in the working age group, in below 25, and there are about 65% of our age group is under 35. We are also, being a large population, we are also a country that is a big market for education. Nearly 56% or 36% of our market is in school education, middle school, and around 53 in higher education. So we are both labor supplying economy, as well as attractive market hub for education. And so these are the issues that I would like to flag before we go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up and really placing this whole document itself in a historical context. Thank you so much for that. I also wanted to touch a little bit on your experience. You've had a chance to work with municipal schools in Mumbai. So I really like you to touch on the school system itself as described by the NEP. There has been a lot of changes proposed at the school level, the largest of which is obviously the shift from the 10+2 system to the 5+3+3+4 system. So maybe you could share a little bit on how the changes to the school system would play out and what it means for society. That would be great.
Yeah, so the 10+2 system that was there in the 1968 policy, the Kothari Commission report, that envisaged a certain kind of a roadmap for education, school education rather, for children's education till the age of 18. To be a complete school completion till 10th standard, and then junior college of 2 years. And well, whether the state never really expressed its intention on ground, at least in policy terms, that was a structure that was there, and it somehow kind of indicated some sort of a vision of providing till 18th school education to a child. As far as this policy is concerned, under the guise of improving pedagogy, and under the guise of addressing it according to the developmental stages of the child, it actually completely breaks down whatever little is left of the public education system. And this is very closely connected with what I talked about earlier, as well as what is being done from 2011 in particular, when the Skill Development Council was launched, and in 15 onwards, how the 2015 onwards, the Skill Development Ministry has come in vogue. And 2 years back in the monsoon session, if you remember, the Right to Education Act, which itself is an extremely weak and absolute problematic kind of a construction of right to education, was further diluted, and one of the somewhat progressive provision of no detention of children till class 8 was broken down to allow people to retain children after class 6th. And this is completely tied to the child labor laws that we have in our country. There are some 6 odd or more child labor laws, and they allow children after 14 to be construed as workers. And so this is something that we need to see very, very closely, because vocational education in this policy has been liberally splintered everywhere, right? I mean, with an exception of Anganwadis and Balwadis, vocational education after class 3, in teacher education, in higher education, on the ODL platforms from distance learning, everywhere you see a very, very clear presence of vocational education. So essentially, it is an agenda to make poor people with poorly serviced public schools further broken down, so that, and the idea of school complexes that is introduced now within the distance of 5 to 10 kilometers, further diluting the already problematic RT norms, where the area within this kind of a radius will be considered a school complex. And so an Anganwadi class, school till class 2, a school till class 5, then a school till class 8, and a school till class 10th, and a school till class 12th will be considered as one school. And teachers of all varieties, people who are assisting in the school, if at all they are there, supposed art teachers, sports teachers, which in the public education system we do not have anymore, counselors, and even playgrounds are supposed to be shared between the school complex. So one can see what kind of quality of learning, teaching is going to be happening. The TPR, which was already very weak at school level, 1:30 for primary, is further weakened for school at school complex level. So you will see that children will be not even get their foundational learning, and in fact their right to education is still from 0 to 18. The same government diluted that right and denied that right to from 0 to 6 in 2002. So this is the whole issue of creating a Vanar Sena, a monkey army factory essentially. So there is this class of workers that are going to be meritorious, and people who will serve in Seattle or wherever where knowledge for IT is created. And there'll be the large masses of people who will have knowledge of IT for functional purposes and have vocational training. They'll compete with each other for the worst kind of jobs that you can ever think of. And the Skill Development Ministry's website and their policies, if you see, it is very, very clear the kind of jobs that are being offered in these sectors. There is also a very clear cultural agenda, but because of paucity of time, I will not go into that now unless questions come up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simantini. I think that was great. Thank you so much for breaking that down and really touching on the challenges that we face with this policy. I'd like to move to Dr. Vikas now and probably get some of his insights as well. So, Dr. Vikas, improving equity is one of the promises of the new education policy. So, I'd like to get your thoughts on how does this policy fare in building an inclusive education system?
Well, I think this is simply a facade to say that this education policy is going to improve equity at all. Of course, there are two sections where they have talked about the equitable, inclusive education of what they call socioeconomically and disadvantaged groups, SEDGS. That in itself is a very, what I call, omnivorous kind of a construction, against the constitutional idea of, the social categories. But what you find is that since this policy creates a kind of a binary between the quality education for a very limited section of society, and then the rest of the category, which is so vast now, the disadvantaged, which includes basically about 85% of our population, SC, ST, OBC, children with disability, women, economically backward classes, plus as they call minorities. Of course, they have not clarified whether linguistic, cultural, or religious minorities. So if you include all that, and if you look at Section 3 and Section 6 of the, Section 6 and Section 14 of this policy, in light of the other provisions in the entire draft policy, I call it, what you find is that it recreates the structural divide, because at one hand you will have good quality education with full teacher support, full infrastructure. On the other hand, this bulk masses of what they call disadvantaged pupils will be basically educated through the national open school system, through home education, through one-to-one, what they call peer tutoring, and online digital modes, all that. Moreover, I mean, if you connect it with the kind of provisions which are given there in Section 3, which is pertaining to the dropouts, you see that their whole notion of dropout and their provisions to stop the dropouts, which I call pushouts, is very instrumentalist. It is entirely disconnected from the larger issues of epistemology and sociology. It's like, if you can give little shining school buildings, then children will get attracted to come to the schools without ensuring the epistemological and linguistic and sociological problems. So, and then the other problem is that since the focus of the policy is on promoting what they call philanthropy, quote unquote, or basically privatization, and since the policy does not make any distinction as such effectively between what is commercial and what is philanthropic, because they repeat only the existing provisions. So it means that through budget primary schools and other things, this mass of people or children is going to be further exploited through privatization. And it is also borne out by the fact that the policy does not lay down any provision for the regulation of fee. Rather, it merely says that the institutions have to adopt a system of transparent self-disclosure. So which means that, fine, you take any any amount of fees, but what you have to do is that you need to disclose it. And the quantum of fee may be linked, as the policy envisages, with some kind of a ranking system of schools. Remember, so this idea that first was talked about in the Birla Money report of the NDA-1, still haunts this policy as well. So it's quite obvious, like, I mean, if you secure better ranks, then you can extort as much as fee you want. If you are lower in the rank, then of course your fees will be lower, but even that lower fee really means exploitation, because we are living in a country where 75% of our population still lives on 20 rupees or less than that, as per the government statistics. And this is also unconstitutional, because the constitution had promised free and compulsory education. Of course, the RT Act also played this quite bureaucratically, but this policy particularly, I mean, does not mention at all, at any place, free education, neither for, as you said, as you asked, disadvantaged students, nor in general. Nowhere you find, any promise of free education. On the contrary, what you notice is that despite a section on, curbing commercialization, this policy deliberately falls short of acknowledging that education is a social good. And again, this is quite well in line with the Birla Money report, which in the preface itself said that education I think we need to cease, we need to stop seeing education as a social good. Of course, there it is not clearly said, neither it is explained here. I mean, it is not this. Then how do we need to see? But I think meaning is quite clear. Education is to be seen as a personal good, to be bought by pupil or by parents in accordance with their socio-economic capacity. So that is again a violation, of their fundamental right to equality, because particularly after recognition of elementary education as a fundamental right, if the state pushes, people to buy education, a fundamental right, in accordance with their own capacity, it is a violation of their fundamental right to equality. It's not in consonance with that. So there is, and lastly, on this issue, I would like to say that since, of course, all the policies that the government of India has adopted so far have maintained a kind of a status quo, and this policy is not an exception, to that already existing trend. But the danger here is greater than ever before, because now state, in a way, kind of withdrawing from the sphere of education. It is not taking on this responsibility. It nowhere says that it is the responsibility of the state to provide equitable quality education for all. Rather, it looked forward to philanthropic efforts. And it, in the case of, for example, the tribal people, it talks of, ashrams and, the local support. And it relies, this started, of course, immediately after the independence, but it continued, like it relies on, the local volunteers and scientists, doctors, etc., rather than ensuring that fully trained permanent teachers are appointed in all the schools. So what is going to happen is that you will have in the central school and in private schools, etc., subject-wise appointment of teachers. But in the schools where mainly the poorer population, which is now inclusive of all kinds of disadvantaged people, in these schools, and particularly as Simantini has already clarified, after the adoption of this idea of the school complexes, now when the norms are being further diluted, so what is going to happen is that this 28% schools, as per the draft of this education policy, which have 30 children or less than that, plus a large number of other schools, which are primarily attended by people from disadvantaged sections, will continue to either have that substandard arrangement of education, or they will be indirectly then forced to shift to budget primary schools. And there is already a lobby which is pushing for it, fine. And this is going to augment the problem manifold, because, and I think this is an important point, we need to see the provisions of this draft education policy in light of various other documents that are coming in this realm now, which includes the 3-year action agenda of the Niti Aayog, the chapter on education, which clearly stated that there needs to be a shift from what he calls, what this document calls, and this is what the policy also adopts, a shift from input-based approach to output measurement approach. Now, which means that if there is a system of ranking, and if these schools, where mostly the disadvantaged people will be going, if they fare badly in that ranking system, the input, that is the grant, will further decrease, fine. So then ultimately they will be closed down. So there is a policy which is creating a situation wherein it would become legitimate to close down these schools and send these children to private schools. And remember, this is completely contrary to at least two examples that I would like to cite. One is, what is called, all our children have been seeing in their textbooks on the opening pages, that Gandhi's talisman, that what should be the parameter of policy, what he calls the last man. So here what is happening is that you will be giving more resources to schools which will perform better in the ranking system, fine, which are the schools of the privileged sections, and lesser resources, and then gradually leading to the closure of the schools where majority of children will be coming from the disadvantaged sections. So it has really a very sinister design actually to keep this bulk masses, which constitute 85% of our population, either to wallow in ignorance, that is what Jyotiba Phule said in 1882 before the Hunter Commission, even though they are and that's my second point, even though they are the actual producer of the entire wealth of this nation, right? Or at best, to train them in some sort of skills, fine? And that Skill India mission, again, let's not forget, is not simply a nationalist program. It's not Skill India meaning that, Indian nationalism. Again, this is a program of the global capital. This is a program of the World Bank sponsored schemes, because if you see, just 2 months before the declaration of this policy or the approval of this draft policy, I think it's a fallacy to say this is a policy. This is a tricky thing that the government did in the media by not releasing the policy, rather releasing the press note first. It's not a policy, it's a draft policy, fine? And this is the 6th draft since 2014. So the government of India signed an agreement with the World Bank in the month of April under the STARS program, right? And thereafter released this policy. So I think, of course, given the paucity of time, I will not be able to talk about the World Bank's program, but I think the chronology needs to be understood. And remember, this is the third phase. There is a lot of literature which shows that how the first two phases of the World Bank's intervention in the form of the District Primary Education Program, that is the DPEP, and the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, that is the SSA, how they have damaged the public systems of education and how they converted the public system to be only the system of the poorer classes. Why they did that? They did it because of a certain understanding of the structural adjustment. What is the understanding of the structural adjustment? The structural understanding of idea is that let those pay from their own pocket who can manage to pay. If they pay less, they will be going to smaller schools. If they pay more, they will be going to elite schools. But what has happened there as a result of this is that the entire public system of education is now left with the voiceless people, the people who are nowhere in the decision makers' role. And I think this policy, this draft policy, if enacted, it is going to further stratify this system. So therefore, I do not see any hope from this policy in the improvement of the prospects of education for the disadvantaged sections.
Great. Thank you so much. I think, like you said, I think just to unpack this itself would require its own talk completely, and we do have a lack of time. So I'd like to move on to a different topic as well. I think something that's come up in debate and a lot of states and other people have talked about. So the Tamil Nadu CM has rejected certain parts of the NEP, especially regarding the 3-language policy, requesting that the states allow themselves to decide their own policies. So in light of this, I'd like you to touch a little bit on how the NEP works with respect to the central and state relationship. And also if you could touch upon the 3-language policy and what it really means and how it would be implemented, that would be a great place to start.
So, one of the things that we need to understand is that the major thrust of this policy, irrespective of a lot of rhetorical language, as Simantini said, careful wording. And I'm saying, I think let me first make this methodological point clear, because otherwise we can't unpack this policy before I come to, the two related issues that you have raised. If we compare different drafts and reports since 2014, this time, of course, the draft is much more, you can say, much more complex in its language, in its rendering of different issues. What it has done is that it has, the imperative provisions on each issues are embedded within a progressive rhetoric. And all of that rhetoric is also not necessarily new. Quite a lot of this is borrowed either from the earlier policies or from the criticism of the first 5 drafts. Therefore, in order to understand this policy, we need to make a distinction between the imperative provisions, which are to be again interpreted in light of the contemporary situation and the historical background, and the rhetoric, which is without any concrete programmatic directions, right? Now, therefore, what you see is that the draft policy at different levels does talk of preserving the local knowledge, local languages, mother tongues, institutional autonomy, creativity, agency of teacher in the teaching learning process, etc., etc. But completely in contrast to all these visionary statements, the policy establishes a system which homogenizes languages and knowledges and centralizes its governance and administrative control. And this can be seen in many, many ways. And I'll give you some examples. We know that there have been a system of designing curriculum frameworks for school education. This started as, first with the establishment of the NCERT in the form of the model textbooks in the 1960s. Thereafter, from 1975 onwards, after every 10 years, there have been the national curriculum frameworks for school education. These curriculum frameworks have already started, or rather augmented, this pace of homogenization across the country. This is further aggravated by the institutionalization of centralized tests for, say, medical, that is, the NEET, or engineering, now teaching. Now, so at one level, this policy also augments it by establishing, for example, by suggesting that there will be a curriculum framework of higher education as well. I think this is the first policy which is laying down the broad contours of higher education system in the country, which is contrary to the whole idea of the academic autonomy of the institutions of higher education. And it doesn't stop there. It also says that the General Council for Higher Education will not only develop a framework of curriculum for higher education, it will also see that certain set of skills are identified to be promoted from pre-primary education to higher education. You see, this is the kind of control. And then it says, the other thing that it says is that, the other part of this curriculum will be value education. Again, from pre-primary education to higher education. Now, it replaces all existing bodies with an umbrella body, a single window, which is going to be called the National Commission for Higher Education. And this National Commission for Higher Education will have, 4 verticals, as it says. The first one will be, the council to regulate. The second one will be the council of accreditation. The third one will basically provide grants, and the fourth one will do everything which is left, including the curriculum making, etc. Now, but these will be the vertical. Basically they will be part of the National Commission for Higher Education. Then there are other things. The National Testing Agency, which will conduct entrance for all universities and colleges. This is also suggesting to establish National Research Foundation. Remember, what is the quality of the research? Which topics are to be approved? How this is to be, how the funding is to be distributed for each subject area? Are the expectations from any institution of higher education? They are not to be determined from a center, that too in such a diverse country where education continues till date to be a subject of the concurrent list, where state and center both can make laws. Fine. So that's then, of course, and it doesn't stop there. Even for school education, very mildly, it is proposing to establish a center which will be called, I think, Parakh. So as of now, it's the departments of education in each state, or other similar bodies which decide, the nature of examination, etc. Now what is going to happen is that this Parakh will decide, they don't say decide, they say it will coordinate, but ultimately, it will push for centralization and homogenized format of exams, even at the school level. And in fact, to carry on the point that Simantini made, this policy does not stop with what the NDA 2 has already done. It has instituted, I think it has empowered the states to conduct an exam at the 6th standard, amending the RT Act. But this policy not only says that the exam will be conducted, in 3rd grade, fine. So the elimination will start from the 3rd standard itself. But, and it's very carefully one should read, I read, the exams will be conducted in grade 3 by competent authority, quote unquote. It does not say by school, fine. Now remember, the action agenda of the Niti Aayog, as well as the earlier drafts of the National Education Policy, including some organizations which have been demanding, like the Center for Civil Society and its new formation, the National Alliance for Independent Schools. They all have been saying that there should be an outsourcing. There should be an outsourcing of evaluation. So basically, that is another form of, I think you need to mute other participants. So that is going to be another form of centralization. Contract will be given to to special agencies outside this educational institutions to conduct tests, to evaluate tests in whatever format they want. And it is in this context that we need to see the language question. No, just one more point.
Yes.
What you also see is that the same policy suggests that the elected bodies of teachers, like the academic council and the executive councils, will be replaced by independent boards of governors. So again, universities don't have their own decision-making powers about the structures. It is being taken away. Remember, all these universities have been established by special acts of parliament. Fine. This draft policy is violating all those earlier acts which granted autonomies to universities. And it is also going to do away or demolish different institutions of higher education which emerged from different socio-historical struggles, because it says that by 2035, all single disciplinary small higher institutions of education must be replaced by bigger multidisciplinary institutions of higher education. Fine. So this is another way in which, I mean, for example, in Maharashtra, in Tamil Nadu, during the freedom struggle, big chains of smaller institutions developed, which have been working with specific objectives. All that will go, and with them will go, the languages as well, because
if I can, sorry to interrupt you, but in the interest of time, I just like to bring in the other panelists as well. If you can finish up this point, and I'll
so the last point about the language, so it does talk about, the promotion of mother tongues and regional languages at every level of education. But in my quick reflections, one, the RTE Act promised it to be the mother tongues to be the medium of elementary education up to 8th standard, which cleverly it reduces it to 5th. Second, it valorizes Sanskrit wrongly by saying that Sanskrit is the mother language of all Indian languages. Third, it proposes to establish, a committee, a kind of a unitary, academy for different languages, rather than adopting the federal idea of establishing translation commission for different languages. And the last point is that until the thrust towards centralization is not abolished, whole idea of promoting smaller languages is bound to defeat and remain as a rhetoric. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. I'm sorry I had to cut you off. I think we are running a little short on time. Before we go ahead to question and answers, I'd like to get some quick thoughts from Professor Ramachandran, who's just joined us. Thank you so much for being here. If you can share your reflections on the national education policy based on your experiences working in Kanpur, that would be really lovely. Yes.
Okay. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Professor Ramachandran, I request you to keep it a little short because we are running short on time, and I'd like to get question and answers as well. So please. Yeah.
I want to emphasize the fact the education must be the child-centric in the school and the query-based at all levels. And I think I find the National Education Policy of 2020 does emphasize the fact that the center of gravity of the education is the teacher and the student. And I just heard a few remarks by my earlier speaker about what are all the things that are wrong with it. But I would like to say what are all the things that are good with it. The good with it is the fact our major problem in our education is that it is too much examination oriented. Getting marks is the end of education. With the result, the inquiry-based education, the curiosity-driven exploration is totally absent in our system, which is the reason why the school dropouts take place, and there is not enough amount of research in our curriculum at the higher level. So both these things really require a serious consideration. And I think in some sense, the policy document, how it will be implemented, I have no idea at all. But I think a policy implement touches upon the right ideas. The right idea being that you have to, in fact, wean away from the examination, centralized or localized. In fact, I think I overheard the fact that the centralized examination in third grade level. I agree. There is no need for a centralized examination of 3rd level. But I read the whole document as though the entire school examination, final assessment of each year was being discouraged. In fact, it is believed that there is no need for you to have every year a kind of a gargantua examination board, etc. On the contrary, there may be a need for a kind of a mark as to whether you have crossed a level. And that is what is being said at 3, 5, and 8. Incidentally, right now also, the open schooling program does have certification process for 3, 5, and 8. And it's very nicely done because they don't really have a centralized question paper. They ask the person who is actually provider, the education provider, to produce the test and evaluate. And it is, once that is done by the person, it is getting a national recognition as a certified crossing a barrier. Now, I believe the third grade examination at any time should be done by only the class teacher, and it should be done entirely by him. Only the thing is, whatever is being done has got transferred as a kind of a depository of a grade in some particular centralized office could be there. So in some sense, I believe very, very, very strongly that the person who should be evaluating anybody at any level must be the teacher. If you don't trust the teacher to evaluate, you don't need to give him the job of a teaching. Teaching is much, much more important job, and evaluation is only a kind of a little on the side. It is not really the mainstay of education at all. You do need some kind of normative test, but the whole idea that the certification based on the centralized evaluation as being the end all in our education is a major flaw in our system. And that is being addressed to in NEP 2020 by saying that there must be a child-centric as well as a teacher-centric program. And to the extent that we are able to make that, I don't think I can, all the other things are really secondary. The fact is that you must, in fact, bring back the dignity of the teacher to this education system, and also the children must enjoy whatever they are doing. Third, this thing about the multiplicity of subjects. And again, I believe it's a good idea. I think the education should always be like a cafeteria. You go in there, if you feel like having dosha, you go and have dosha. If you don't feel like having a puri and sabji, go ahead and do it. So the idea is that the children must be able to choose the subjects at all stages. The idea that you must have a package that must be done by everybody, as though that package is very important, is, I think, a wrong notion. No university anywhere in the world, no great university, in fact, straitjackets the students into a particular program. That this and not that is something that has been, for a long, long time, we had this MPC, math, physics, chemistry. Biology is nowhere there. But today, all fields, mathematics, physics, chemistry, every one of them draw inspiration from biology. Now, for me, for example, the way I have been trained, I'm ignorant of biology. Whereas today, what is needed is the child must be aware of biological sciences as he prepares to become a mathematician or a physicist. Well, I think this is all that I want to say at the moment. Plenty of choices and child-centric and teacher-centric education system. All the other things, who is going to dictate terms, who is going to be the boss, etc., I am uninterested. I don't want to say whether the state must decide or central must decide or thing. But the fact is the teacher must decide at all stages. And every school should be as broad-based as possible. Again, there was a criticism that why should there be everything is a multidisciplinary school? Very good idea. In fact, if you happen to be in an institution where only mathematics is done very well, like Chennai Mathematical Institute is a very ideal, very fine institution, mathematics. Drawback is there is not even no science, no arts, no literature, nothing at all in it. You want to have a one-dimensional person? There may be one-dimensional person, like Ramanujan was very brilliant mathematician. But we don't want to produce only brilliant mathematicians. We want to produce very many kind of people. And that is...
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think just in the
interest of time, that's enough for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your words. I just want to give Dr. Pandey a chance to come in and maybe share his views as well before we have to close the session. So, Dr. Pandey, if you can come in and share some remarks, that would be really valuable for us.
So, let me start by saying that there is nothing new in this new education policy. Universalization of education has been talked about since the constitution was framed. There is a recommendation to implement common school system by the Kothari Commission, which never happened. No government did it. This government is talking about universalization again, but tell me how will they achieve it without a school system? Even the 25% seats for disadvantaged children and weaker sections under the Right to Education Act. And as Vikas Gupta ji rightly pointed out, it says free and compulsory Right to Education Act. Even after that, education is neither free nor compulsory. So how will you get all these children who you see begging at the major street crossings in all the cities of India? How will you get them to school? There is no clear vision about how will they go about achieving universalization. Teaching in mother tongue is a established concept, but tell me how will they enforce it in private schools? Most of them in urban areas which are English medium, and Tamil Nadu has always opposed the three language policy. A child in North India learns any other language than Hindi. In the name of three languages, they will introduce, English and Sanskrit. But then, howsoever they may talk about, traditional knowledge and Sanskrit and all that, but the reality is that even the Yogi Adityanath government had to convert 5,000 primary schools in Uttar Pradesh English medium, because the demand from the market is for English. And until you have a system where prominence is given to English, English is compulsory if you want to write civil services examination, if you want to become an engineer, doctor, judge in this country, manager, you have to know English. So until there is a change in that kind of policy, you can't hope to promote either the mother tongue or the Indian languages. So that there again, there is no clear vision as to how they would implement it. Privatization has already begun at the school level, and we can see the harmful effects. The quality of government schools has gone down. Now they are trying to do the same. At least the higher educational government institutions were of good quality, but now when they will bring 100 top universities around the world to open campuses in India, you can imagine what will happen to the quality of government institutions. So all these things have already been happening. There's nothing new about it. So I will just close it because there are 2 minutes. There are some questions. I think those questions should be answered, especially one about what will happen to the madrasas.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's, I think if we can go maybe 5 to 10 minutes over, if that's fine, I'd like to take a couple of questions. I think there was one question that came in on YouTube from Abir Hussain, who said that, this is his question. He said, original status of madrasa system is attacked with majoritarianism. Could someone reply to this and give a clarification on what the policy means for the madrasas? Maybe either Simantini or
I can quickly talk about this, and Vikas can fill in case I'm falling short. It is after the Sachar Commission report that people actually started understanding the function that the madrasa schools are serving, and it's a problematic construction in people's mind who have no idea about the kind of work that these schools have been serving people who are unreached. And it is not religious education. It is some amount of little bit of Quranic education is given, which is part of Islamic education, both for girls and boys, right from the beginning of Islam. But these schools, in fact, are attended even by Hindu and Dalit, children in unreached areas, and people who are qualified in specialized subjects, not in teaching, but people who are masters, master level people also work in these madrasa schools. This was meant to have a certain kind of better direction and after Sachar Commission report, but soon we know the course of history, and the whole the work of madrasas is in fact now being seen as religious indoctrination. whereas the work of the schools run by RSS is not discussed in equal measure at all. And this policy, as Vikas said, bundles every kind of socio-economically backward population of our country, particularly the Muslims. And so it pushes them further into, kind of marginalization, but by not taking into account the special nature of madrasa. Otherwise, you fund them completely, give them the kind of funding you give central schools, and you see what they do. So if you put in only that much and expect a certain kind of a result, whether it's madrasas or public schools, I mean government schools, you will have problems of the nature that our country is seeing.
Thank you so much, Simantini. I'd like to take another question as well. Dr. Vikas, maybe you can touch on this. So one is, the question is about research and what the future of research holds in light of this policy. I don't think that's something we touched upon in our conversation that much. So maybe you can go a little bit into detail of how research is going to be thought of in this policy. I know you mentioned it briefly, but maybe you can go into more detail.
Yeah, but just half a minute, I want to add that there are two kinds of madrasas, one which get funding from the state and the other ones which are independent. The other ones which are independent will, I think, be more vilified, as Simantini has hinted, and the madrasas which get state funding, the greater centralization of testing, and contrary to the last speaker, the greater curtailment in the agency of the teacher will actually compromise with the specific nature of the madrasas. That is my anxiety. Anyhow, and this policy does not talk about the madrasa education at all, is the attitude that in itself is quite worrying. Now, the research thing, at many, many levels. One, in terms of the establishment of the National Research Foundation as a central body, that in itself is worrying, because it is completely contrary to what the policy otherwise says very progressively. It says that, the researchers should be, echoing Gandhi, it says that researchers should be such that they resolve the local problems. Now, if the research is to be kind of guided from the center, you can understand from the recent examples, there have been cases where on the instructions of the center, certain topics have been denied to be researched upon. Increasingly, the emphasis on the research ethics in the universities, there are special cells being established for that. So and we know that the research in certain areas, will be easier to be promoted by the center. I mean, for example, the idea that, the ancient Indians could develop the plastic surgery or not, those kinds of issues, whether, how much utility of cow's urine or milk is there, those kinds of researches or anything. This is just an example. Anything. Today, we have one kind of government. Tomorrow, we can have another kind of government. But if the research is kind of directed from the center, it will always be vulnerable, that what can you research and what can you not research. And the last point I would like to make is that everywhere it emphasizes on the need to link research with the industry. And I think it's a very narrow idea, because research, if it is to be collaborated, it should be also seen in terms of the dairy, farming, fishery. You understand? I mean, the agriculture, its research is not necessarily to be guided by the interests of the industry. If it is to be guided at all by economic concerns directly, though that should not be the case, generally it should be the researcher whose curiosity should be the basic guiding principle. Still, if it is to be guided by economic concerns, then I think those concerns should not be restricted to a set of skills or the agenda of the industry. But that is going to be the danger when the private companies and their CEOs are going to be on the boards of the universities. That, and particularly in the sciences, I think this danger will be much larger. And the last point is that I think the reduction of the masters into 1-year degree program, and that too further complicating by eliminating MPhil will particularly damage research in social science, because social science research is different from natural sciences. Natural sciences have a lab culture. So there is a peer group and there is a subject on which research is going. In social sciences, even under one supervisor like me, you will have very different kind of people. They must have a better sense of research ethics and research ideas before they enter the PhD program. So I think the abolition of MPhil and reduction of masters to 1 year program will actually compromise with the specialized knowledge which is essential for research.
Sure. So I do have one. Thank you so much, Dr. Vikas, for taking that question for us. I have one last question that I'd like to bring in. I think I'd like to get Dr. Pandey's reflection on this. So this is again come from the YouTube comments. On one hand, the government calls for Atmanirbhar Bharat, but then they're also allowing bringing in foreign universities. So how does this dichotomy work? And maybe you can share a little bit on your reflections on that front.
Keep my answer very short. This is very contradictory. I mean, talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat and inviting foreign universities, ultimately what will happen, just like in the United States, now we have been through that experience at the school level. In the United States, there is only one top university, which is public university. That is the University of California at Berkeley. Otherwise, all other universities are private. Stanford, MIT, everything. So, same thing will happen in India. In the end, you will be left with just a few good government universities and rest all will become private. And you can imagine how difficult it will be for students from weaker socioeconomic backgrounds to get higher education in good quality institutions. Thank you.
And there will be no reservations in the private university. This policy does not mention, take acknowledgement to the issue of caste. It mentions caste only when it uses the category of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. In fact, it goes all out to get the military training for tribals in certain areas. So it's in terms of its cultural and nationalistic agenda also, there is much that is problematic.
In fact, just to add to what you're saying, it only talks of strictly merit-based scholarship. It does not talk of scholarships in terms of social deprivation. Nowhere you see that. So even that whole idea that the research will be supported, education will be supported for today, for example, you have the scholarships for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe separately. Now all that is going to be based only on merit. So that is, I mean, really how even for private institutions, I mean, they want to make it so that nobody opposes it. They say that even in the private universities there could be merit-based scholarships, fine. So for weaker sections, but merit-based. It's not that, I mean, whosoever can make it to that level, if belonging to scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or OBC, etc., or whatever, PWD, will get scholarships. So I mean, this is quite.
Sandeep bhai, Didi here.
Yeah, Didi, boliye.
नहीं, हम ये कह रहे हैं, there is no mention about the, the migrant.
Children, neither about migrants nor about conflict zones. Neither about nor conflict zones. So even conflict zone, and nor about conflict zones. Migrant at one place, they're in a very passing manner they do refer, but the what you say, although they don't give a vision how to, except that there will be open schooling for available and home teaching for.
No, nothing.
Whatever. Yeah,
I'm sorry to say, nothing has happened. I have been working with the migrants for the past 40 years in Kanpur. Until today, we run our own educational, centers. But none of the government schools, even if they admit the children, because of RTE, they have to admit, no, they cannot say no to us. But even when they admit the children, they just admit them in class 6, 7, according to their age. The child is illiterate, he doesn't know anything, he or she, but they will insist that, no, according to his age, he has to be in class 6 or 7. So what is the point in sending those children? So the parents tell me, See, at least you just allow them to work with us. Don't say, we don't want to send them to school because they are not gaining anything from them. So we have to really bring out this point.
And this is happening
Dr. Gupta,
after pandemic, because during pandemic we realized how huge is the population which is migrating, and still we have not addressed it.
Dr. Gupta, sorry, we'll have to close right now. I think we're well over time. I'd really like to thank everyone for their patience. Thank you so much for being here. If there are any other questions, please put it in the YouTube comments. We'll try to answer the questions. And thank you so much, Mr. Vijaya Ramachandran, for coming in and sharing your views at the end. I'm glad to hear you as well.
Sorry, I couldn't come.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all the participants. Unfortunately, we do have to close. Hopefully, there will be other sessions where we'll address more and more questions as well. All right. Thank you.